I was 12 when my world turned upside down. That morning started like any other. Dad kissed me goodbye before heading to his job at the construction company, where he was a site manager. Mom barely glanced up from her phone when he left. I remember thinking how strange it was that they were so different from each other. My name is Teresa Guidi, and that was the last time I saw my father alive. He collapsed at work that day from a massive heart attack, or so they said. I was in math class when the principal called me to her office. Mom was already there. Her makeup was flawless, her mascara perfectly intact, despite the terrible news she had just received. "Your father is dead," she said in an even, almost cold tone. Too even. I broke into tears, the world around me blurring as one tear followed another. Mom, however, sat motionless, mechanically patting my back. That evening, I overheard her talking on the phone with her friend Eloise. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her voice carried through the thin walls of our suburban home. "Honestly, Eloise, this might be for the best," Mom said, her voice quiet but disturbingly clear. "Being a widow is far more respectable than being divorced. Plus, I get to keep everything without the hassle of lawyers." Then she laughed. She actually laughed. I know, I'll play the grieving widow at the funeral. I already picked out the perfect black dress." I sat on the stairs, my hand covering my mouth to keep from screaming. I couldn't believe my ears. At Dad's funeral, while people offered their condolences to my heartbroken mother, only Aunt Sarah looked at her with disapproval. She knew. She had always known how Mom treated Dad. But no one dared to speak of it aloud. Mom, however, didn't remain alone for long. 3 months after the funeral, Gaston Calabrese appeared in our lives. He had 2 children from his first marriage, David, who was 11, and Ornella, a 10-year-old girl with hair as straight as a pin and as blonde as corn silk. When they came over for dinner, Mom prepared elaborate dishes, things she never made for Dad. "Teresa, darling," she said one evening in a syrupy, sickly sweet voice I barely recognized. "Gaston and I have something to tell you." I already knew what she was going to say, from the way they sat together on the couch, holding hands. Mom beamed like a teenager. "We're getting married," she announced, her face glowing with joy. "Isn't it wonderful? You'll have a new father and brothers and sisters." I forced a smile. "That's great. Congratulations, Mom." But inside, I was boiling. Gaston smiled at me, but his eyes stayed cold. "David and Ornella are so excited to have a new sister," he said. But I saw the way his children looked at me, as though I were nothing more than a dirty stain on their expensive sneakers. That night, I called Aunt Sarah and cried for hours. She listened patiently, silently, and then said, "Sometimes, sweetheart, the family you choose is more important than the one you're born into. Remember that." After the honeymoon, David and Ornella moved in with us. They immediately claimed the best rooms in the house, including my playroom, which was transformed into Ornella's art studio. When I tried to protest, Mom waved me off. "Don't be selfish, Teresa. We need to make them feel welcome." From then on, Mom seemed like a completely different person. She spent hours helping Ornella with her homework or sitting in the stands, cheering as David played soccer. Meanwhile, I ate dinner alone in my room, listening to their laughter echo through the house. The way Mom looked at Gaston seemed almost ridiculous. In her eyes, he was the center of the universe, as if the stars and the moon shone just for him. I had never seen her look at my father that way. "David needed new cleats for the soccer team," she said. "Ornella signed up for painting lessons, and canvases and paints appeared in our house almost monthly. Mom always found the money for these things. As for me, I quickly learned not to ask for anything. Even when I needed something as simple as pencils or textbooks, I felt guilty, as though I were asking for too much. Mom would look at me with irritation, waving me off. "Do you always have to be so demanding, Teresa?" They started taking trips together. Nothing extravagant, weekend getaways to nearby towns, hiking in parks. I was never invited. You'd be bored, Mom said without even looking up as she packed. Sandwiches and a thermos for David and Ornella sat on the kitchen table. Besides, someone has to feed the cat. In those moments, I felt my voice slipping away, dissolving into nothing. Most often, I ended up at Aunt Sarah's house. Her home became my sanctuary. It was a small cottage with a cozy kitchen that always smelled of baking. Sarah never had children of her own, but she treated me as if I were her daughter. She listened when I poured out my feelings, encouraged me, and said wise things that stayed with me. "This isn't right, Teresa," she once said, watching me unpack my overnight bag. "A mother shouldn't play favorites." I just shrugged, trying to act indifferent. But inside, I felt anything but. When I turned 16, I finally worked up the courage to talk to Mom about my future. Over dinner, when everyone seemed to be in a good mood, I cautiously brought it up. "Mom, I've been looking into schools. I want to go to college and study business management," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. For a moment, there was silence. Then Mom dropped her fork. It clattered against her plate, and that sound still rings in my ears. "College, Teresa. We can't afford that. We have other priorities. David and Ornella's education is what matters now." David smirked at me across the table, while Ornella smiled openly, as if celebrating her victory. Gaston, as usual, kept eating indifferently, as if this conversation had nothing to do with him. Later that evening, I tried to talk to Mom alone. In the kitchen, while she was cleaning up the dishes, I brought up the money Dad had left us. "What about Dad's insurance? Didn't he save that money for my future?" Her face turned to stone. "That money is long gone, Teresa," she snapped. "Do you think running this house, buying food, clothes, do you think all that is free? Don't be so selfish." Her words cut like a knife. I knew Dad had intended that money to fund my education. But it had all been spent on her perfect new family. The following weekend, I went to Aunt Sarah's with red, swollen eyes from crying. We sat in her kitchen, the air filled with the scent of fresh coffee. I told her everything, sparing no details. Sarah listened silently, cradling her coffee cup in her hands. When I finished, she set the cup down without a word and headed to her office. I heard doors opening and closing, and then she returned, holding a thick envelope. "Your father came to me 2 weeks before he died," she said, carefully sliding the envelope across the table. "He looked worried, as if he sensed something might happen. He gave me this and asked me to keep it safe until you were ready to go to college." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a bank statement showing a significant savings account opened in my name, with Aunt Sarah listed as the trustee. It turned out that Dad had been setting aside this money for years, quietly and purposefully, knowing it might one day be my lifeline. "He said your mother had started acting differently," Aunt Sarah explained softly. "He was afraid she might use the money for something else, not for your future. So, he wanted me to hold on to it for you. He didn't know what might happen, but he wanted to make sure you were protected." I clutched the statement to my chest, and tears streamed down my face. But these weren't the tears of pain and disappointment I'd shed so often before. They were tears of gratitude, tears of love for a man who had thought of me even after his death. "We can't tell Mom about this," I whispered, wiping my eyes. Aunt Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with understanding. Over the next 2 years, I focused on my studies, carefully hiding my plans to apply to college. Every evening, I pored over university brochures, researched admission requirements, and planned my next steps. Meanwhile, David and Ornella found endless ways to assert their superiority. "Hey, Teresa," David sneered one evening as I cleaned the kitchen after dinner. "I heard the diner downtown is looking for a dishwasher. You should hurry, maybe you'll get lucky. Or maybe they'll let you wipe tables too," Ornella added with a giggle. They laughed like it was the funniest joke in the world. I just walked past them, refusing to let them see how their words hurt me. Silence became my shield. It drove them crazy. Soon, graduation day arrived. I was still wearing my cap and gown when Mom and Gaston called me into the living room. They sat on the couch, their faces serious, like judges ready to pass a verdict. I stood before them, feeling like I was on trial. "Teresa," Gaston began, his voice stern. "You're 18 now. We've been generous, but you need to understand that you can't stay here forever. It's time to find a job and start building your own life." I forced a smile and nodded. "I understand. I'll move out next week." They exchanged surprised glances. I saw Mom open her mouth to say something but then close it again. "Well, good," Gaston finally said, trying to maintain his composure. "That's a very mature decision." Neither he nor Mom asked where I was going or how I would support myself. They seemed too relieved that I wasn't resisting. The day of the move came faster than I had expected. I packed my belongings into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. It was surprising how little I had accumulated over the years. It seemed I had subconsciously been preparing for this moment all along. When Aunt Sarah pulled up in her blue Honda at 9 in the morning, I stood at my bedroom window, watching her approach. I waited, expecting Mom or someone else to come out and say goodbye, but the house remained silent. Only behind Ornella's curtains did I see a faint movement. As we drove away, I watched the house of my childhood grow smaller in the side mirror until it disappeared completely. But I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a weight lifting with every mile that put distance between me and that house. That summer, I got a job at a small cafe called Sunshine. I served coffee and sandwiches to regulars who were kind and always left generous tips. The cafe's owner, Mrs. Peterson, treated me like family. She let me pick up extra shifts so I could save money for school faster. Every night, as I closed the cafe late in the evening, I felt the pieces of my life coming together to form a new picture. I was free. Free from pretense, lies, and the crushing feeling of being unwanted in my own home. Now, I could move forward, alone, but determined and ready for change. September arrived, and I boarded a plane to begin a new life at university. Sitting by the window, I watched the clouds stretch out below and could hardly believe the moment had finally come. I was leaving behind everything that tied me to my past and heading toward a future that, at last, belonged to me. The business management program turned out to be not only challenging but incredibly rewarding. I threw myself into my studies wholeheartedly, feeling my efforts begin to pay off. Every completed course was another step toward the goal I had dreamed of since childhood. My roommate, Jessica, became my first real friend since high school. She was cheerful, kind, and incredibly smart, and in her presence, I felt truly accepted for the first time. At first, I didn't tell her my story. But one evening, over tea, our casual chat turned into a heart-to-heart conversation, and I opened up to her. She listened quietly, without interrupting, and then simply hugged me and said, "They lost a daughter, they lost a mom." Her words sank deep into my heart. My Facebook page became a window into the life I had left behind. On it, they looked like the perfect family, smiling at David's soccer tournaments, captions under Ornella's photos celebrating her wins at art exhibitions, selfies from beach vacations. Every post came with carefully curated captions. "So proud of our amazing kids, there's nothing better than family time." I was never mentioned. It felt like an official declaration that I had never existed. Holidays were now spent in Aunt Sarah's kitchen. We cooked delicious meals, watched old movies, and created our own traditions. They became closer and more meaningful to me than any family gathering where I had always felt like an outsider. Occasionally, Aunt Sarah would notice me scrolling through my mom's posts and gently take the phone out of my hands. "Don't torture yourself, Teresa," she'd say. "You're writing your own story now." By the time I graduated from university, I knew exactly what I wanted. My hard work paid off, and I graduated with honors, earning the title summa cum laude. Thanks to internships and academic achievements, job offers started pouring in. Jessica's father, Mr. Reynolds, who ran a large marketing firm, had noticed my work during a university presentation. During the interview, he told me, "We need sharp minds like yours. Your professors speak very highly of you." I started as a junior analyst but immediately knew I wanted more. I worked late, took on additional projects, and studied market trends in my free time. Within 5 years, I was promoted twice and had saved enough money for a down payment on my own apartment. When I signed the mortgage papers, I stood in my empty living room for a long time, holding the keys in my hand. I let myself cry. But these were tears of happiness, tears of pride for everything I had achieved on my own. The biggest surprise came one morning, 7 years into my job, when Mr. Reynolds called me into his office. His voice was calm, but there was a sense of ceremony in his tone. "We're creating a new position," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Senior Director of Strategic Development. The board and I unanimously agree that you're the right person for the job." I opened the folder and nearly gasped at the proposed salary. It was a number I'd never dreamed of, especially at my age. I never felt the need to broadcast my life online. I had social media accounts but mostly shared random photos of sunsets or morning coffee. Only Aunt Sarah knew about all my accomplishments, the promotion, the new apartment, or the sleek black Mercedes I had bought as a gift to myself. "You've earned all of this," she'd say, pride shining in her eyes. Meanwhile, David and Ornella's social media profiles looked like a poorly executed parody of a perfect life. David posed next to his used Hyundai, captioning the photo with something like, "Living the luxury life." Ornella posted pictures from the local mall, tagging expensive brands she clearly couldn't afford. Their lives seemed like an imitation of success, while I was building my future honestly and on my own terms. One post, in particular, made me laugh out loud. David stood next to his car at a local auto show, his back straight and proud, with the caption, "When hard work pays off. Entrepreneurial success." I read it while sitting in my Mercedes AMG, whose price tag exceeded his annual salary, and smirked. But unlike David, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. I had long since realized that my life was mine alone. Then came the message that changed everything. It popped up on my Facebook one Tuesday morning. "Teresa, this is your mother. Next month, I'm turning 55, and I'm hosting a celebration at an expensive restaurant you've probably never heard of. I expect you to attend. It will be on the 15th at 7 p.m. Try not to embarrass me." I froze, rereading the message several times. 12 years of silence, and this was her way of reaching out. No, how are you? No attempt to mend fences. Just a command to show up at her party, with a thinly veiled jab about the restaurant. I almost deleted the message immediately, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the desire to see just how far her charade would go. That evening, over a cup of tea in Aunt Sarah's cozy kitchen, I shared the message with her. She listened intently before finally asking, "So, what are you planning to give her as a gift?" I smiled, pulling out my phone to show her the confirmation email, a luxurious 2-week trip to the Maldives at a 5-star resort, including first-class airfare. The cost? Around $15,000. Aunt Sarah's eyes widened. "Teresa, that's far too much. She doesn't deserve it." "Oh, I know she doesn't," I laughed, taking a sip of tea. "But can you imagine her face when she realizes what she's been missing all this time?" Aunt Sarah shook her head, smirking. "You're a little wicked." "Maybe," I admitted with a grin, "but it's going to be a show I don't want to miss." On the evening of my mother's birthday, I slipped into an elegant Chanel dress, a piece of understated luxury that stood in stark contrast to the loud outfits I expected to see that night. I deliberately took a taxi to the restaurant, anticipating how this would fuel their assumptions about my life. The restaurant was exactly what I had expected, a place designed to impress people who had never stepped foot in a truly high-end establishment. Frozen seafood plated with gold leaf, ostentatious desserts, glittering chandeliers, everything about it was theatrical. The hostess led me to a private room, where the party was already in full swing. My mother sat at the head of the table in a sequin dress that sparkled under the chandelier like a Christmas tree. Beside her, perched like a king on his throne, was Gaston. David and Ornella flanked her like loyal heirs to a royal dynasty. The rest of the seats were filled with familiar faces from my past: Aunt Eloise, Cousin Rachel, and other distant relatives I hadn't seen in over a decade. My mother's eyes landed on me, and her lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "Oh, Teresa, you came," she drawled with a forced smile. "You could have dressed up a little more for the occasion." I ignored the comment and took a seat at the far end of the table, silently observing the spectacle unfold. Their conversations were full of shallow boasting. Eloise regaled everyone with tales of her trip to Miami. Rachel couldn't resist bragging about her children's achievements. Meanwhile, Ornella and David went out of their way to underscore their supposed superiority. Naturally, my mother was the star of the show. She laughed the loudest, told exaggerated anecdotes, and gestured theatrically, like an actress on stage. But beneath all that sparkle, there was a faint edge of nervousness. I stayed quiet, studying her. When the waiter placed a glass of wine in front of me, my mother shot me a quick glance, as though checking to make sure I was behaving appropriately. "Teresa, you seem so distant from the family," she said suddenly, her voice laced with mild reproach. I raised my glass and smiled. "Perhaps," I replied calmly. "But it's given me a lot of time to focus on other important things." I noticed a slight tension in her face. She hadn't expected that. I chose not to push the topic further, but deep down, I knew this evening would leave an impression she wouldn't forget. Aunt Eloise handed my mother a set of aromatic candles that looked charming enough to pass as a thoughtful gift. "They're from that cute shop in the mall," Eloise explained proudly, as if she were presenting a rare antique relic. My mother accepted the candles with a smile so exaggerated it bordered on parody. She thanked Eloise with such enthusiasm that the entire table broke into applause. Next came Cousin Rachel, who handed over a gift card to a local spa. "For a day of pampering," Rachel declared with a beaming smile. Again, my mother gushed her thanks, as though she had been handed the keys to a kingdom. The gifts kept coming: a cookbook, a decorative vase, a basket of bath essentials. My mother praised each one with carefully rehearsed gratitude, ensuring every guest felt appreciated. Her reactions were so calculated that it was almost comical. Finally, it was David and Ornella's turn. They stood up simultaneously, their smiles so stiff they appeared unnatural. "Mom," David began, and I had to suppress a grimace at the way he addressed her. "Ornella and I pooled our money together to get you something special." Ornella pulled out her phone and showed a picture. "It's a 65-inch smart TV. We already had it delivered and installed in your living room." My mother gasped, clutching her chest as tears streamed down her face. She hugged them tightly, sobbing. "My wonderful, generous children. I can't believe it. You must have saved for months." The room erupted in applause, and excited exclamations filled the air. All eyes turned to me. It was my turn. Slowly, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. My mother's face immediately darkened. "What's this supposed to be?" she snapped. "Open it and see," I replied calmly. She frowned, as though I had handed her something insignificant. "This is exactly what I expected from you," she spat, her face reddening with anger. "You show up here in that plain dress, probably the only decent thing you own, take a taxi because you can't afford a car, and now you give me this? A little box. What could possibly be in here? A gift card to McDonald's?" She tossed the box back onto the table like it was trash. It rolled across the surface, leaving a scratch on the cheap veneer. David and Ornella giggled behind their hands. A few guests looked uncomfortable, but most seemed to be enjoying the drama. Gaston continued eating his dessert, as though nothing was happening. I picked up the box from where it had stopped, calmly brushing off crumbs and dust from its elegant wrapping. The room fell silent, waiting. "You know what's funny, Mom?" I said, my voice unexpectedly quiet. In this little box is a check for a 2-week luxury vacation in the Maldives. First-class airfare, a 5-star resort, all-inclusive. It cost $15,000. My mother turned pale. Ornella dropped her fork onto her plate with a loud clatter. "That's impossible," Mom stammered, her voice trembling. "You can't afford something like that. You're lying." I laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of joy. "You'd know whether I could afford it or not if you'd shown even the slightest interest in my life over the past 12 years, I said, locking eyes with her. "Let me catch you up. I'm a senior director at Reynolds Marketing Group. I own an apartment in the city, and that taxi you mock me for taking? I took it because I didn't want to leave my Mercedes parked in this neighborhood." David froze, his jaw dropping. Ornella stopped giggling, her face a mix of shock and embarrassment. "But since you're so sure I'm a failure," I continued, slipping the box back into my purse, "it's clear you don't want anything from me. So, I won't ruin your birthday any further. Enjoy the television. I hear its resolution is almost as good as the one in my home theater." I rose from my chair, picked up my purse, and walked toward the exit. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the echo of my heels clicking down the hallway. Outside, I called for a taxi, and as soon as the car pulled up, I headed straight to Aunt Sarah's house. Only there, surrounded by her warmth, did I finally allow myself to relax. Each deep breath felt like I was shedding the years of weight I had carried. She was waiting for me. 2 steaming cups of tea sat on the coffee table, and her face radiated the kindness and patience that always made her home feel so comforting. I told her everything, about walking out of that ridiculous party, about my mother's cutting words that burned like molten iron, and about how I'd finally realized that no connection with that woman was worth my effort. "Some people never change," Aunt Sarah sighed, shaking her head. "Your mother has always cared more about appearances than reality. She never appreciated what she had, and I'm afraid she never will." We talked late into the night, reflecting on family, memories, and the things that truly mattered. But our conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen, though I immediately knew who it was. "Teresa, sweetheart," came my mother's syrupy voice. I almost laughed at her sudden change of tone. "I've been thinking about what happened," she began, "and I realize I may have overreacted. If you're still willing to give me that gift, I'd be happy to accept it. We could use this as a fresh start. I want to be part of your life again. We're family." I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. "No," I finally said, my voice calm but firm. "We're not family. We're just people who happen to share DNA. And you don't want to mend our relationship, you just want that vacation package." I hung up. In the following days, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My mother called from various numbers, her mobile, the house phone, even Gaston's phone. When she realized I wasn't going to answer, the messages started pouring in. "Teresa, please call me. We need to talk. I've been thinking about what you said about your job. Maybe you could help David get into marketing. He's very creative. Ornella would love an internship at a big company like yours. It would be amazing for her resume. The house needs some repairs, and since you're doing so well, maybe you could help." Each message was more transparent than the last. No apologies, no attempts to acknowledge the past, just an endless stream of requests and hints about money. It was like watching a desperate gambler trying to recover their losses. Except my mother hadn't lost money, she'd lost her place in my life. I read each message with a strange sense of detachment, as if it were a case study for analysis. Her tactics displayed a painful kind of creativity, guilt-tripping, flattering compliments, manipulative appeals to family values. She even escalated to threats. "I'll tell everyone how you abandoned your mother when she needed you." "She showed up at my house today, if you can believe it," Aunt Sarah said about a week after I returned. "Demanded I give her your address." "And what did you say?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I told her to get off my property or I'd call the police." Aunt Sarah smirked. You should have seen her face. She kept insisting she had a right to know where her daughter lives. But I reminded her that she gave up that right years ago. I pictured my mother standing on the porch in one of her expensive outfits, gesturing wildly in a futile attempt to get her way. It was her usual tactic, but now I could see right through it. She didn't take it well, Aunt Sarah continued. She shouted that we were both ungrateful, that she sacrificed everything for you. The neighbors probably heard the whole thing. When she realized I wasn't going to budge, she stormed off to her car. But, Teresa, be careful. She looked desperate. I've already blocked her everywhere, I reassured her. On social media, my phone, email. And security at my office knows not to let her in if she shows up. After our conversation, I walked through my apartment, taking in everything I had built for myself, the modern furniture, the artwork on the walls, the view of the city skyline. Every piece of this space was the result of my hard work. I thought about my mother's messages and her sudden interest in my life now that she knew about my success. It was almost laughable. She had cast me aside for the illusion of a perfect family, and now she was scrambling to claw her way back in to maintain the appearance of success. The next morning, I called the travel agency and changed the name on the vacation package. The Maldives trip was now booked under Sarah Guidi. When I told her, she spent a long time trying to refuse, but I insisted. You deserve this more than anyone, I said. You've been more of a mother to me than she ever was. Aunt Sarah hugged me tightly, and in that moment, for the first time in years, I truly felt at home. What do you think about this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you soon.